Hello and welcome to yet another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. This that you're watching is not a podcast. This is a video where I talk about podcasting. You can get the podcast at podcastpontifications.com. Today on the program, I want to chat about podcasting over the internet. Well, that's the topic. Podcasting over the internet? The question mark, so I need to lift my voice up. There's been a few different articles I've seen recently that talk about the idea of making the most niche and focused of all podcasts, and that is a podcast that is aimed at employees of a company. You might remember from the early noughts, or sometimes even before that, when we had the thing called an intranet. Basically a small internet that ran internally to a computer, to a company. And if you work for a large organization, you might still have an intranet, though many things have gone public. Intranets are good for sharing, or we thought they were good for sharing information because there's lots of people around. We didn't want to put memos in folders any longer. So we started intranets a long time ago. In fact, I used to be in charge of an intranet for my company. I quickly gave it away and took over the internet strategy for the company because that was a lot more exciting to me than just putting out memos and stuff. But there have been a lot of articles, I'd say a few articles that I've seen recently that talk about this internal usage of podcasting. And I wanted to talk about it on the program today. And I want to take a little bit of a different approach with what I mean when I talk about podcasting over the intranet, because there's a slight play on words here. So, yes, you could do a lot of things with this. You could replace your email newsletter with a podcast. The question is, how do you get your people actually to listen to this? You could produce a daily morning announcements. Remember morning announcements from school, kids? Remember that? For those of us that are my age, who had over the speakers, the principal or somebody else would come over and talk about the announcements for the day. Okay, that's a viable option for a employee-focused podcast if you want to. It's kind of boring, kind of dull. So what I want to talk about instead of doing boring and dull things like that is I want to talk about two interesting ideas on how you can, as a business owner, or perhaps even as an employee, take advantage of podcasting though that it's better than the internet. See, podcasting over, as in it's better than, superior to the intranet. Because look, it's not hard to produce, and it's not hard to make a podcast that goes to employees, and it's not any harder than it is to make a regular show. And in fact, it's a little bit time-consuming, it's challenging, and who wants to listen to that thing? So I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do the boring, standard, yucky stuff. I want you to do something new and unique and consider podcasting over the internet with two big things. Number one is I want you to consider changing it from a top-down to a bottom-up approach. Top-down means somebody, either somebody in HR perhaps, or communications, or somebody else in the line. If it's top down, then a team or a person at the top of the organization is determining what information goes out over the podcast, which to me is going to be boring and droll almost all the time. It just is. And I've done this. I was the VP of a couple of different advertising agencies and had to do things like this, and they just are naturally not very exciting. It's information, it's things you have to know or things we hope you know, blah, 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 boring. But the other way, bottom up, is where things get pretty interesting to me. Bottom up means it doesn't come from the top. It comes from the people. It comes from the multitude of employees that are out there. But when I say comes from, I don't mean you just put together a podcasting studio, designate 2 or 3 employees, put them in charge, approve what they do, and then have them voice the content. I don't mean that. When I say bottom up, I mean let them have it. Let them have everything about it. Let your employees run your podcast. It's called an employee cast. We have a name for it now, and it's a growing trend. where the employees of the company are the ones that produce the podcast for other employees of the company. I'm not talking about using a podcast as a sales or lead generation tool. Totally viable. I think you can do that. I'm not talking about this podcast being the kind of content that shows how smart and what thought leaders your company is, which it might do that, but that's not the goal. I think the very good goal of an employee-centered, employee-ran podcast is a podcast for other employees. Just like fan casting. You know what fan casting is? That's where fans of a television show or a movie or a book or something else get together and oftentimes without the permission of the studio or the author or whatever else, they just create their own content because they're such big fans of it. That's what you want to do. That's what a good employee cast is. When the employees are fans of the company, which starting there is always a challenge, empowering them to create the kind of content that they want, that other employees want. Now, the challenge with that, and which is going to lead me to point number 2, the challenge with that is you have to make sure that they're not releasing sensitive information, because you never know how this is going to be picked up. But I posit to you that's no different than anything else you produce. If you send an email to all of your employees with sensitive information, there is a very good chance that that information will be leaked. So can we not have the conversation about public versus private? Because if it was truly private, you wouldn't tell anybody. You certainly wouldn't make it in an electronic medium that is designed to be forwarded, unless you work for the NSA. And that's a different situation altogether. So I don't want to talk about that. And in fact, I want to go the exact opposite direction. I want to encourage you that if in fact you do have a podcast for your company employees, that you make it public. Now, by definition, it probably already is public because you could get an app. You could do the private podcasting options that are out there to make sure people log in or authenticated, which may or may not work. I say throw that all away. I say throw it all away and make it public. More than just make it publicly available, don't even hide the RSS feed. Go ahead and submit it to Apple Podcasts, to Google Podcasts, to Spotify. Not because you're hoping lots of people who don't work at your company find it. That's you don't care whether that happens or not, would be my suggestion. It makes it very easy for all of your employees to listen. There's no barrier to entry other than the regular barrier to entry of podcasting. If it's available everywhere, no special custom feed, just go search for it. Here we are. Number 2, it's publicly available, which causes you, or if you're taking my first suggestion, if you turn over to your employees, it's making them think about what's the kind of content we should produce that is, first, most valuable to other employees, but also people also might find interesting. And if you think that's radical, it's not. Inside stories, behind-the-scenes stories on Instagram, pretty popular. Blogs, pretty popular. We're showing what the life inside of this company is. You can do that with a podcast too. Again, not designed to tell people specifically how awesome you are as a company, but designed to provide value to your employees so that in the event that they share it with someone else, maybe somebody else gets value of it too. Certainly your customers, maybe even your competition, but that's okay. Showcase who you are as a company. Big fan of going public, not private, and a big fan of turning it over to the employees rather than making it a top-down venture. Those are 2 ways I can think of where podcasting is superior to an intranet. What do you think? Need some help? I launch podcasts for companies. It's what I do. Podcastlaunch.pro. Email me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro. We'll chat. Tomorrow, I'll be back with yet another podcast pontifications. Cheers.